right, everybody, welcome back in. The Wobcast 2.0 is back, coming at you with lots to discuss today. It's yours truly, Wobby, joined as always by my partner and co-host, Gyles. We are chock full of topical content today, Gyles. I'm excited to go back and forth with you as the Vikings have been in the news and the NFL has been in the news. It's a little bit of that dead period right now, but there's still a lot to discuss, and a few things have happened since the last time we convened. So excited to get to all of this with you and talk a little bit of Vikings. How you been?
I've been doing absolutely phenomenal. Happy Friday. What a whirlwind of a week, but it's all great. Honestly, one of my favorite parts about football and the NFL and the Minnesota Vikings is that they always find unique ways to keep people interested and keep people engaged and finding activities to get people like entertained, so to speak. Like, for example, you and I are going to the Morgan Wallen concert tonight at US Bank Stadium. Should be a wild ride. And I don't know if you followed this. Maybe you haven't seen this trend. I've definitely noticed this. For big country concerts at US Bank Stadium, typically they march out some type of Minnesota Viking onto stage, whether it's a coach, a general manager, a player. So the real question is, who's coming out on stage tonight?
Yep. I mean, I think the head coach is probably a great guess. Although now Wallen played last night, and I did not see. I know Adam Thielen was there, but I because I knew Adam and his wife were going, but I didn't see. Did they march anyone out last night on stage? Because I'm wondering if they did, whoever that was, probably not going to be there tonight. But you can bet your bottom dollar two things. There's going to be a Viking person out on stage with Morgan Wallen, and Morgan Wallen's going to have a Vikings jersey on. Those two things are going to happen, and the crowd will go nuts when that happens.
We'll get a little bit of a skull chant going on.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, TJ Hockenson strikes me as like a Morgan Wallen type of guy.
I would agree. They definitely they exude the same ambiance.
yeah, I would say so. So yeah, that'll be a lot of fun. We'll both be there taking it in, and it'll be one of those rare US Bank Stadium appearances, off-season appearances for us. So looking forward to that. We'll be there plenty during the fall when we're watching Vikings games. So that'll be a lot of fun tonight. Also this weekend, Gyles, I'm participating in a couple of Vikings alumni events over the weekend. So I'm looking forward to that. I tweeted and put on Facebook some details about the first one, which is on Saturday, which is a meet and greet with Paul Krause and Ron Yeri at Paul Krause's Viking Garage. So I'm looking forward to that. And then it's Ron Yeri and Chuck Foreman and Tommy Kramer on Sunday. We're going to go to, I think it's a Tommy Kramer property. He's hosting it. So looking forward to those two events where we'll be hanging out and talking football with former Vikings. You and I like to get on the podcast and talk about the current Vikings, but it'll be fun to take a step back into time a little bit. When you hear those names, Gyles, Ron Yeri, Tommy Kramer, Chuck Foreman, Paul Krause, that is golden era Minnesota Vikings football right there.
Absolutely. That's the Ring of Honor for the Minnesota Vikings. Put a statue up in Egan for sure. I mean, Chuck Foreman, he's even more iconic even in the entire universe, not even just in football. So it's always exciting to have somebody famous be a former Purple People Eater for sure. That'll be a fun time. Those guys are still kicking it around. So yeah, that'll be a fun event.
All right. So a couple things on my mind, Gyles, I wanted to get to. You ready for this?
Let's do it.
First thing, and it's one of the older ones of this group, but it's been a while since you and I have gotten together. The tampering investigation involving Kirk Cousins and the Falcons concluded, and a punishment was rendered down by the NFL, but it was barely a punishment. Would we agree on that? A fifth round pick they forfeit. So
yeah, barely a paper cut.
My hunch is that the absence of owner involvement in this was why the punishment wasn't severe. Like, it wasn't Arthur Blank calling up Kirk Cousins and talking to him, which is kind of what happened with Stephen Ross and the Miami Dolphins when he was tampering with Sean Payton and Tom Brady at like the same time, and the Dolphins got slapped on the wrist for that. This isn't really even a slap on the wrist. Any surprise? I think Vikings fans are like what the heck? Like Vikings fans, I think were like there was a point in time, Gyles, pre-draft where people were like, are the Falcons going to have to give up their first round pick? You know, are we going to get their first round pick? Right. So were you surprised by this? Any thoughts on this?
I mean, ultimately, this just comes down to whether or not the NFL assumed malice in the tampering. Because at the end of the day, whether you're talking about the Minnesota Vikings, the Atlanta Falcons, KLC Financial, or wherever you might work, it's made up of a collective of individuals, and they're all technically free to do whatever they want. There's consequences for what they may do. And at the end of the day, you can't control what everyone does. And if you have some athletic trainer that happens to connect with Kirk Cousins, I'm guessing from the NFL's perspective, they were pretty thorough in their investigation to understand what happened. Was there malice? Was this an accident? You know, all those different factors. And if it was more or less a lower level employee, not someone from a top ranking position dictating decision, I think that was why you came to this decision. Furthermore, right? Now, I think two things can be true. They determined that there was not malice involved here. But secondly, I think it's pretty evident that a lot of NFL teams are dabbling in the tampering window through indirect means. But those are just details. At the end of the day, I mean, it just shows that this is a nothing burger. And Kirk is going to be an Atlanta Falcon. JJ McCarthy is going to be a Minnesota Viking. It's just time to play football.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And, you know, I think the league is like, they don't want to ignore stuff and turn a blind eye to stuff, but they also don't want to make something into a bigger deal than it really is, right? Yeah. So,
I also think it's important to know, based on our previous conversation, I mean, you tell me if I'm too much of a conspiracy theory nut here, but I think the entire tampering window, although it's designed from an operational procedure to make sure that players get to the right places and that, you know, people don't tamper and all those different things, but at the end of the day, it's partially spun to generate buzz for the NFL. That's kind of an arbitrary date that's picked in the middle of March to say, all right, everyone in the entire world, watch the NFL. We are artificially creating an event for people to watch and engage with and create entertainment. And that's the primary purpose behind this. I mean, there are a million other different ways that you could logistically handle a free agency period. But props to the NFL. They're brilliant marketers when it comes to packaging a thing that you want to watch. I mean, me included. I would pay money to be able to participate in that if it wasn't available for free. It's a phenomenal event. It's my favorite event of the year. So it's important to keep that context in mind when reviewing stuff like this.
Yep. Well said. I agree with that. All right, next one. I thought it was notable, Gyles, the way Kevin O'Connell spoke about Sam Darnold, JJ McCarthy, and who's going to be QB1. You know, he said heading into camp, Sam Darnold is going to be QB1. So that's a definitive statement of Darnold over McCarthy. And I know there's a lot of people who are hoping or maybe even expecting that it'll be JJ McCarthy who starts, right? You take a quarterback that high in the draft and you assume he's going to be the starter from day one. And at least heading into camp, that doesn't appear to be the case. It looks like it'll be Sam Darnold for sure going into camp. And I think he'll be the starter week 1 of the regular season. But so while that's a definitive statement by O'Connell saying it's it's Sam Darnold who is our starter, he did say going into camp, Sam Darnold is our starter. He didn't say Sam Darnold is our starting quarterback or Sam Darnold's going to be our quarterback when we start this. He said going into camp. So to me, there's a little bit of an opening there. I think O'Connell left a little bit of a possibility for if JJ McCarthy just wows us or Sam Darnold just takes a step back, I can maybe slide McCarthy in there to start. But to me, it's a 90% chance that it's Sam Darnold who starts week 1 of the season. But I thought it was notable exactly what Kevin O'Connell said. I think that was intentional.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that's something I greatly respect about KOC is that he is very intentional with his words on all sides of things on the field, off the field. And I think two things really come to mind. One, he was very intentional about not putting intense pressure on JJ McCarthy to perform, right? I think that's important for a head coach to apply to a rookie quarterback. But secondly, I love the fact that he has put zero date-based timelines to this development when it comes to JJ McCarthy. This is all skills-based. If he develops all the skills in the next 2 weeks, he's on the field. He's not saying, all right, he's going to start by week 5. There is, and I truly believe this, and correct me if you would disagree, he is very based on skills. And if he gets to the skills at week 7, I think there's a chance he slides in, right? Yeah. It's all based on, here's the plan, here's what I expect out of you for phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, in order to be able to get on the field during training camp and get on the field during the regular season. And that, I think it's kind of safeguarding the potential misuse of a quarterback like this, because they're moldable clay, right? This can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing if you handle it incorrectly. So I'm really confident in KOC based on the way he's approached this in this entire offseason.
Agreed. I'm confident in KOC's ability to develop a quarterback, and that includes everything from the footwork and the mechanics and the minutia of playing the position to the aesthetics and the the rhetoric that's used to describe it and discuss it. I think KOC's a 10 out of 10 when it comes to managing that.
Agreed.
I saw a little snippet where JJ McCarthy or his representation saying he's not going to camp unless there's fully guaranteed elements to his contract. There was a little bit of hubbub about that. I'm like, whatever. Is this really something we're going to have consternation over also? So we don't know if that's really how he feels or not. I don't know if there was a direct quote from him or his agent, but let's even say it is true. People can be upset about that or they cannot be upset about that. But if you are a Kirk Cousins supporter, you can't be upset about JJ McCarthy taking that posture, because that's what Cousins has been doing since he left Washington, right?
I think that's great point. Great point. I completely agree. And furthermore, to build on that point, he is a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. It's not completely insane to ask for a fully guaranteed contract. That is not unheard of. And at the end of the day, it is pennies for that, right? I mean, something would have to be, they would have to go horribly wrong for us to want to cut a rookie quarterback before the end of his 4-year contract. So, I mean, it's 4 years. He's a rookie, and he probably won't even play his first year. I don't imagine that's an issue. You're going to pay him anyways. I don't think that's something to get worried about. Furthermore, I don't know if you've heard this soundbite, and maybe this is on your list to talk about today, but I forget who asked it in the NFL or the Vikings media group. But someone is asking, are you going to go somewhere after training camp? Are you going to go, somewhere this offseason? Are you going to go vacation or go somewhere cool? Yeah, after minicamp. I'm sorry. Yeah. And he said, no, I'm here in the building. We're going to go to work. Right. Love it. I really appreciate that attitude, because he could very easily go slinging all over the globe, go on private jets and go sit in Tahiti. And he is the first one in, the last one out in the building. And I think that is a great sign across all the attributes that he wanted a quarterback. Mentality, huge. He's a killer. He is an absolute killer. And I love that. Furthermore, he understands we run a very complex offense. I mean, you could make an argument that we're top 5 in complexity when it comes to NFL offenses. And he recognizes that's not something that you're just going to stumble into being great at. You got to put in the time, right? And even if it was a simple offense, it's still hard to learn going from college to the NFL. And so I really appreciate the time he's putting into that, because that means it can become more automatic when he does enter the field, whether that's in 2024 or 2025.
Yep. I am sure that if you could just cut open a vein with him and ask him, he'd be like, I wish I was like, I want to play right now. Like, I want to play in games and be the starter right now. Right.
Yeah.
With that being said, there has to be some semblance of relief, might be too strong of a word, but some semblance of just increased comfortability that he knows, okay, we got Sam here. He's going to be the guy right away. I eventually will be the guy. I mean, I was chosen in the top half of the first round, and I believe in myself. The team believes in me. I'm going to be the guy here eventually, but I'm not going to be the guy here right away. There's got to be, and he knows that he's going to prepare and operate as if he were starting, but he's not going to. And that's just like, you're putting coins in the bank all the time, coins in the bank, by preparing so that when your number is called, whether it's week 5, week 10, week 15, week 1 next year, you're just that much more prepared. And there's got to be something about that comfort of, I can prepare and get ready to go without the pressure of having to perform. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that can go for a lot of positions, but especially the most primary position in football that requires, among other things, a good head on your shoulders. I mean,
Yeah.
you could make a pretty good argument that 90% of quarterback play is between the ears. And I think it's incredibly important to build that comfortability to make sure that you can tweak any mechanics that are required, because there are a few things to tweak for sure. And it's far better to focus on doing those things in the right way versus forcing it. I've said this in a number of different ways. When you view organizational productivity, like when you're looking at a company, an NFL team, a friend of mine has his doctorate in organizational speed and leadership, and his dissertation is all about the idea of psychological safety and the idea that when people feel safe, they tend to perform better. They tend to perform faster, and they put a better product on the field. By inverse, people that feel psychologically unsafe in the idea like, oh, I'm scared for my job, or what are people thinking of me? And psychological safety can be self-induced. It can be induced by outside factors. But people that feel psychologically unsafe, they tend to make more mistakes. They tend to go slower. They're less risk averse, or they're more risk averse. So when you think about building the prototypical quarterback to fit into the Minnesota Vikings, I love that we're building a comfortability, because that means psychological safety, which means actually the play starts slowing down, which means he can speed up. And I'm just a big fan of that in general. When you're trying to build a great team, whether in business or in football, making people feel safe is important. Now, that feels like a counterintuitive topic when you think about NFL organizations, because people get cut all the time and there's an inherent fear like, oh, I better perform, otherwise I'm out. And I think there's a nuance there where that can still exist and drive good performance. But when there's a connection between the coach, whether it's your actual positional coach or the head coach, still knowing that like you have to perform. When there's a comfortability there, top performance comes out.
Yeah,
at least that's my opinion.
It's a really interesting discussion, Gyles, as it pertains to NFL quarterbacks and coaches, and then spin it to the Minnesota Vikings when we came off the Zimmer Cousins era, right? I mean, Zimmer as a head coach and a defensive mind, brilliant. I mean, his record in Minnesota stands on its own. I mean, he had a great record in Minnesota, and his defenses were top-notch, top of the league. Cousins, on his own, great when it comes to statistics, had a good record in Minnesota. But those two mixed together weren't a great mix. And a lot of it is because of how Zim wanted to handle personality and how Cousins needed to be handled. Those things were juxtaposed. And that's not a Zimmer problem or weakness. That's not a Cousins weakness or problem. That's a problem, and the idea of bringing these two together was probably flawed from the start, right? And the Vikings were in a tough spot. I mean, they had their guy in Teddy Bridgewater. He got hurt. They had to bring in Bradford, and then Case Keenum did what he did. And it was a really weird, hard decision to make. The Vikings, as an organization, decided to go all in essentially on Kirk Cousins and pair him up with Mike Zimmer. And I think from a psychological standpoint, that was a mistake. They weren't a good match when it comes to the psychological safety that you're talking about, which is important to Kirk Cousins. Like Zim treated Case Keenum the same way he treated Kirk Cousins, but that drove Case Keenum to perform, and so that worked with Case because Case was like, Zim doesn't believe in me, and I keep performing, and he still doesn't believe in me, so I'm going to perform even more and make him believe in me. That was Case's mindset. That was not Kirk's. Kirk, it was detrimental to Kirk's performance. Maybe that's too strong of a word, but it hurt his performance to not have the belief and trust of his head coach. So I think you're hitting on something that is absolutely a good point and a factor in the coach-quarterback relationship and the ability of quarterbacks to perform. I think it's something that, a psychologist and an athlete and a coach could sit and have their own podcast and talk for hours about it, it's something that is going in the right direction here with McCarthy and O'Connell. So that's good. Before we come back to a Vikings topic, last one sort of NFL wide, Trevor Lawrence signed a new contract, Gyles, since the last time we recorded. 5 years, $275 million, $200 million guaranteed, $37.5 million signing bonus, under contract through the 2030 season. Average annual salary of $55 million ties him with Joe Burrow for number one in the NFL. That's a lot, man, for Trevor Lawrence. I'm not saying I don't believe in him, and I get it. You want to drive a Ferrari. This is what it costs to drive a Ferrari. So this is what it costs to keep Trevor Lawrence. So it was either do this or lose Trevor Lawrence if you're the Jags, right? But man, that's a lot of money tied up in Trevor Lawrence.
So clearly he's going to be struggling financially for a bit. I'm just kidding. But I was actually just having this exact discussion with a group of Minnesota Vikings fans earlier this week. And to be very clear, I'm not communicating this as my position, but I think it's an interesting anecdote. When you compare quarterbacks like Trevor Lawrence to Justin Herbert to Kirk Cousins, I think a lot of both Minnesota Vikings fans and just general NFL fans would say, Justin Herbert and Trevor Lawrence are leaps and bounds ahead of Kirk. In fact, someone was trying to bet me saying that Trevor Lawrence would have way better stats than Kirk and all these things throughout the course of their career. And I said, well, let's just slow down for a second, because I think both things can be true. I think the core talent behind Herbert and Trevor Lawrence may be better technically, but it is a group sport. It is not a singular game of golf here. Like, you do rely on other players in order to achieve success or failure for that matter. And I think when you look at the track record on the field, a lot of people's gripe with Kirk Cousins is that he got paid these massive contracts and never won anything, right? And whether he could have or not, he didn't, right? You could argue over coulda, woulda, shoulda, but didn't, right? He did not. That is a factual statement. Whether he could or could not, he did not. And that is the gripe with most Minnesota Vikings fans against Kirk Cousins. Yep. And if you translate that exact logic and framework over to Trevor Lawrence and Justin Herbert, they now just got the bag, and both of them have not won something with arguably better teams around them. I mean, for the first 2 years in the NFL that Justin Herbert was in a Chargers uniform, they maybe had the best roster in the NFL.
Oh yeah,
and could not achieve something. So it's interesting when you look at this. They couldn't win on a rookie scale contract. Are they going to be able to win now that they fully got the bag? And honestly, I did take the bet, to be very clear, for the person that was trying to bet me on Kirk Cousins against Justin Herbert, or I'm sorry, Trevor Lawrence. And I said, I think there's a chance that Trevor Lawrence has a higher aptitude to go win a ring. But I think if you're looking at stats, Kirk Cousins has got it. He has built the formula to go achieve stats. Whether you like it or not, you love him or hate him, he knows how to put up numbers. And I think he's done that in both amazing environments and subpar environments. He still puts up numbers. So I do expect Kirk Cousins to have a better stat sheet. But Trevor Lawrence may be able to get farther depending on what you're putting down on the field and on the W board. But it's really interesting when you look at that from that perspective, that they haven't put any W's on the board and they're kind of falling into the Kirk Cousins category.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think Herbert is just more of a special athlete or player than Lawrence and Cousins. But I think Cousins and Lawrence side by side, I definitely would take Cousins, and I think this contract and the Jaguars' position with Lawrence is a belief in him. I don't think it's we're going to pay him for what his record has been. We're going to pay him based on what our belief is in where he can go. And I think with Cousins, you're paying for what he's done, what his you're paying for his qualification. Like, you're the Atlanta Falcons, so you haven't had a legit starting quarterback in a minute, and you feel like you've got all the other pieces on offense in place, so you need someone who is a certified, bona fide driver of a fast race car, and you're paying for Michael Schumacher, right? Like, he's going to come in and he's going to operate your car exactly how it's supposed to be operated, and that's what he did in Minnesota. Yeah, so to me, it's two different postures there. Lawrence is a belief. Cousins is already qualified. So, I kind of put him in the same tier, I think. If you had to tier quarterbacks, I'd put Lawrence and Cousins sort of in that same tier. I'd probably rank Cousins a little, ahead of Lawrence within that tier, but I'd put him in that sort of second tier beneath Mahomes, Allen, Burrow, Lamar, Hurts, Herbert, Stroud. After that, it'd be, Dak, Cousins, Goff, Tua, Kyler Murray, Deshaun Watson. Like they're kind of all in that secondary tier. I think you can win a lot of games with Kirk Cousins. The Vikings did. I just think there's more to see from Lawrence. I just see a very streaky player. I see a lot of turnovers. I just, again, they clearly have a belief in him. And in order to see it through, they had to commit to him financially in a very significant way. But you make a great point, Gyles, where it's like you couldn't really win significantly with him on that rookie scale contract. How are you going to build a team to win with him when he's got the
biggest contract there is?
Yeah, that's a huge challenge, man. I don't know how they're going to do that.
I also think there's an additional factor here at play. Oh yeah.
What's that?
Yeah.
What's that?
Sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, it's like I get where the Jags are though, because it's like if you were going to be on the pro, like the side that said no, we got to sign him to this, you would say, okay, so you don't want to give him this money. Okay, so now what? What are we going to do, right? Are you going to let him walk and we're going to draft another one and start over? So I get that. That's a compelling argument to be signing him. They're in it's the same with the Lions and Goff, right? Like what are you going to do? Not re-sign Goff? And what are you going to do after next year when he walks? You're going to start over? You're going to have Hendon Hooker? So the quarterback thing is tough. I mean, and that's why once you got Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Tom Brady, once you got them, you just pay them. You keep paying them and you got them. And short of that, you're in this sort of weird in-between zone, and it's really tough to manage the roster.
And that's one thing that I think a lot of Minnesota Vikings fans and general NFL fans fail to consider, the opportunity cost with quarterbacks. You always can easily look at the team across the street and say, oh, what if we had Patrick Mahomes? That would be awesome. Of course that'd be awesome. Do you know how to go get that? If so, then do it. If there was a recipe to go get Patrick Mahomes, every team in the NFL would go do it.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Away. Right away.
They would go do it immediately. So by contrast, if you get rid of the quarterback that is allowing you to actually be at least competent on the field, you have to look at the downside of what happens when those go away. You could be far worse. I mean, quarterback is incredibly important. So I think you're hitting on an incredible point that I think it's important to consider. If you have an option to upgrade, let's do it. And we've talked a lot about this. The goal is always to get better first and then cheaper second, right? Yeah. Not cheaper first, better second, right? The goal is always to put a better roster on the field first. If you can get better and cheaper, okay, we're awesome. We're off to the races. But the goal is always to get better, never to get worse. Don't get worse for the sake of getting cheaper, especially at the quarterback position.
Yep, exactly right. And that's the approach to take, I think, in business. That's the approach to take with quarterbacks. That's the absolute right approach.
Yeah.
Okay. Last thing for me, Gyles, and something I think we can get into in a little more detail, maybe once we get to training camp. But I'm just thinking about TJ Hockenson and his return from injury, and so with the way the schedule, with when he was injured. The fact that it's a significant injury that he's got to get back from, it happened late in the season, and the way the schedule lays out with the London game and the bye, I think we don't see Hockenson until after London and the bye, which means week 7. That's where if I had to put money on it, I think he's back on October 20th, week 7 against the Lions, actually, which is the team that injured him.
Yeah.
So you look at the room. I look at the tight end room, Gyles. I think it's a pretty dang good room. Even without Hockenson, I think it's, you can make it work. It's Josh Oliver, Johnny Munt, Robert Tonyan, Nick Muse, and N'Keal Harry. And I don't know how many of them are going to be there, how many of them are going to make the roster. But I'm just thinking about, what it's going to be. What's the offense going to look like without Hockenson? So I'd like to get your thoughts on that. And the one point and I'm going to use an analogy to sort of illustrate this opportunity that I think is in front of Kevin O'Connell, because I do think this is an opportunity. I know Hockenson not being there is a bummer, but I think it presents an opportunity for O'Connell and the Vikings offense. Imagine like when you're grilling, there's two, I love analogies. So when you're grilling, there's two main tools. You have tongs and you have like a spatula to flip, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
if I said, hey, you can't have your spatula, for the next 4 times you grill, you're gonna have to use your tongs. You're gonna be better using tongs on your grill after that period of time, right?
Yep.
And so this is what's happening to the Vikings offense. It's like, hey, you're not gonna have Hockenson for all of camp, all of the preseason, and the first 5 or 6 games. So whatever you do from a personnel standpoint and a play calling standpoint without Hockenson, you're going to be better with those personnel groupings. Those players are going to be better, and you're going to be better as an offense with that personnel grouping, and you're going to be more diversified now as a play caller. And then when Hockenson comes back, you're going to have all the Hockenson stuff and all the Hockenson style and all of that, plus this improved subset of your presentation. So I'm really curious to see what O'Connell does with this. Who are the people with elevated playing time? What are you going to what's your forte with the tight ends? And then how do you sort of combine all of that once Hockenson is back?
That's a very intriguing point. Honestly, I didn't really look at it from that lens, but you might be stumbling onto a gold mine here, because when you look at most major NFL wannabes, not wannabes, could-be's, so to speak, people that are on the second or third mark of the on the bench on their respective position.
Yeah,
there might be some significant talent there, but they don't get their day on the field simply because of opportunity, right?
Yeah.
If you're a wide receiver on the Miami Dolphins that was drafted and you're sitting in a good spot, you're never going to be wide receiver 1 because you are behind Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, right?
Exactly.
You might be a phenomenal talent, but it's just not going to work.
Yep.
And when you think about winning a championship, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about winning a championship, part of it is being able to win through multiple facets, right? You need to be able to have a counterpunch, and some NFL teams simply don't have the time to go develop that counterpunch. So you could view this time, the first 6 weeks of this season, as the time for the Minnesota Vikings to develop that counterpunch. So once we get TJ Hockenson back, now to your point, we have so many different ways that we can win. So as we stretched it out the season, so many different NFL teams are going to throw different defenses up at our offense. And now we're going to be able to go spin and have a lot of different complexities there versus being a very, I don't want to call it vanilla because that's maybe calling it too simplistically, but a very standard, here's how we win, and people having different ways to go figure that out. If we're doing it this way and this way and this way, you're not going to give enough time for other NFL teams, especially in playoff times, to be able to figure out, here's how I beat the Minnesota Vikings. So the longer you can stretch out that complexity and that illusion, the more likely you are to be able to stretch it into the offseason and go win some more games.
Yep. That's exactly right. And so I think you and I are on the same page here when it comes to O'Connell and our belief and confidence in him to manage a situation like this while Hockenson is out. Like, I don't have any doubt that O'Connell can figure out how to score points without Hockenson. Mm-hmm. To me, the taller task is once Hockenson is back and like full go, it is that drawing that balance of, we're going to keep doing what we've been doing, man. Like let's say they're 4-2, right? Or, 5-1, or like they got something going. And it's like, now you got to get Hockenson back. And the challenge now is, how do we incorporate him effectively in a way that could make us better without screwing up what's already going well? Because we don't want to disenfranchise him, but we don't want to overcompensate, overcorrect when he comes back in. That to me is the harder challenge.
I also think there is maybe actually a secret benefit to him specifically staying out 8 weeks. And the reason I mention this is in the subject matter of the tight end screen type format, because if you remember last offseason, there was kind of we'll call it a contract dispute, whether it was a large one or a little one. There was a contract dispute with TJ Hockenson. They ultimately got it done. He's a Minnesota Vikings for a while. But at the end of the day, there was a contract dispute. And if you remember correctly, when it comes to actual playing time, he did not spend much time practicing in training camp last year because of that dispute. And for the audience that don't know much about tight end screens, it is entirely predicated on timing. And if you cannot practice your tight end screens, and when it comes to timing, you're screwed up. And if you translate that to the beginning of last season, we had a great team. We were winning in a lot of categories statistically, but we could not get our screen game running and we could not get the timing right. There was plenty of drops and things like that were the result of that. And I think there's a chance that occurred because they're like, all right, we'll get the contract done today and we'll get it done tomorrow. And they let training camp go by and they didn't adequately prepare for the tight end screen game. And if they know going into this offseason and this training camp, all right, TJ Hockenson is not going to be an option until week 7. They're going to go practice that in other capacities and get good at it. Right. So now you're adding that back to your playbook, which is an incredibly important element to a Kevin O'Connell offense. I think a lot of people don't realize how much that's built into a Kevin O'Connell offense. And that was a blow last year, not being able to utilize that well because we couldn't get the timing right. So I think there actually is a secret benefit to him staying out 8 weeks, to us having to force ourselves to build a tight end screen game through other means.
Yep. Well, it'll be fun to see sort of what transpires there, what personnel groupings they're using. We've talked about, we think the Vikings are going to be more of a, 2 tight end base offense type of team. And Hockenson being unavailable does not mean that that's less likely to happen. If anything, it means it's more likely to happen. And then when Hockenson is back, how does he get incorporated into that? And you're right. How do they get things down with him, with timing and, the rhythm that the offense is in general. So, these are all things that head coaches have to deal with and manage, right? It's not just showing up on Sundays and calling plays. There's a lot that goes into it. So that's a lot of points and content for us to go over. The tight end one, though, Gyles, was the main one. And I think we're going to continue to talk about it. I think we could dedicate a whole episode to it, to when's he going to be back? What's it look like while he's gone? And then what's it going to look like when he is back in the fold for the offense? And, we're in that sort of dead period right now for a few more weeks. But before you know it, man, it's training camp. It's, watching reports coming out of Egan, who's looking good, and super excited for it, for the football season to ramp back up. A few people who I follow in the fantasy football world are, tweeting about dusting off their cheat sheets and updating them. And man, I'm ready to go, man. I'm here for it. My body says it's time for football.
I cannot agree more. And obviously you and I have been logistically planning for training camp visits and stuff later this summer. And if we're going to end this on a bright note, the one that I'm most excited to watch, and then I'm excited to watch a lot of guys on the field, but the one I'm most excited about, especially in the context of this latest conversation, speedy Jalen Naylor. He got hurt at the beginning of last training camp and just kind of train wrecked his progressions. But I am very excited about Jalen Naylor and what he could mean to the wide receiver room and then general receiver room in general and people catching the ball. I think he could be a sneaky show-out appearance for the Minnesota Vikings during training camp.
There's always that when we were in Mankato, there's, the training camp standouts. We would always say, who's going to be Mr. Mankato? Right? Who's going to be Mr. Mankato? Who's going to be, and I think for you, we were saying Jalen Naylor is a guy to watch. And, if he can prove his mettle on special teams, maybe as a returner, I think it adds even more ammunition to the case to keep him. And then I've walked back the opinion that wide receiver 3 is in need, but I still don't think they are strong there. And I think that, that is even more motivation for Jalen Naylor and other young players at that position to step it up and show out during training camp, because I think there's a few reps and a few targets per game to be had right there at that wide receiver 3 position. So we'll see who ends up being that guy, or if it's something that gets, it's a rotation with Powell and others. So anyway, fun to watch all those battles transpire and happen at TCO Performance Center in Egan and at training camp, which is just around the corner. So, all right, my notebook, we got to the end of it, man. You got anything?
Lastly, I'm going to make a prediction for tonight at Morgan Wallen. I think it might be JJ McCarthy that comes out on the stage with Mr. Wallen. I think it might be McCarthy. That's my gut reaction right now.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll see how it goes.
We will see how it goes. It'll be fun to watch, fun to predict, fun to talk about it and discuss it. So, and we'll do that plenty of more times on future episodes of the Wobcast 2.0. That's going to do it for today. We thank you for listening and watching. We encourage you to like, follow, subscribe, engage with the Wobcast 2.0. You can find this podcast wherever you find all of your other favorite podcasts. On behalf of Gyles, this is Wobby signing off for now, but until next time, Skol Vikings.